The US-China trade war, a defining economic conflict of our time, began in 2018. It has since escalated, impacting the global economy and geopolitical landscape. This trade war is about more than just tariffs. It reflects a deeper rivalry between the world's two largest economies. The US, under the Trump administration, accused China of unfair trade practices. These included intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and state subsidies. These actions, the US argued, gave Chinese companies an unfair advantage. The US demanded changes to rebalance the trade relationship. China, however, viewed these accusations as attempts to contain its rise. It argued that its economic practices were necessary for its development. China vowed to retaliate against any US actions. This set the stage for a protracted trade war. The conflict has had far-reaching consequences. It has disrupted global supply chains and created uncertainty in financial markets. It has also led to a rise in protectionist sentiments worldwide. The trade war is a defining feature of the increasingly complex US-China relationship. At the heart of the US-China trade war lie accusations of unfair trade practices by China. The US argues that China has benefited from these practices for too long. This has come at the expense of American businesses and workers. The US points to several key issues. One major point of contention is intellectual property theft. American companies allege that China forces them to transfer technology as a condition of doing business in China. This forced technology transfer, the US argues, allows Chinese companies to gain an unfair advantage. They can then compete directly with American companies, both domestically and globally. Another issue is the massive state subsidies that China provides to its domestic industries. These subsidies, the US contends, artificially lower the cost of Chinese goods. This makes it difficult for American companies to compete on a level playing field. The US argues that these subsidies distort global markets and harm American businesses. The US also accuses China of manipulating its currency. By keeping its currency artificially low, China makes its exports cheaper. This gives Chinese companies a price advantage in international markets. This practice, the US argues, further contributes to the trade imbalance between the two countries. China denies these allegations. It maintains that its economic practices are in line with international trade rules. It argues that its rise has been a result of its own hard work and innovation. However, the US remains unconvinced. These fundamental disagreements over trade practices have fueled the trade war. The US-China trade war escalated rapidly in 2018. The Trump administration imposed tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. These tariffs, essentially taxes on imported goods, were meant to pressure China into making concessions. The US hoped to force China to address its unfair trade practices. China responded in kind. It imposed retaliatory tariffs on American goods. These tit-for-tat tariffs escalated the trade war. They increased the cost of doing business for companies on both sides. This hurt businesses and consumers alike. As the trade war intensified, both countries took further actions. The US imposed restrictions on Chinese investments in sensitive sectors like technology. It also blacklisted several Chinese companies, accusing them of national security threats. China, in turn, targeted American companies operating in China. It imposed new regulations and delayed approvals. These actions and counteractions deepened the trade war. They created an atmosphere of uncertainty and distrust. This had a chilling effect on business investment and economic growth. The trade war became a major source of tension in the US-China relationship. Global ramifications, trade and supply chain disruptions. The US-China trade war has had profound global ramifications. It has disrupted global trade and supply chains, creating uncertainty in the global economy. The interconnected nature of the global economy means that a trade war between the world's two largest economies has ripple effects across the world. One major impact has been the disruption of global supply chains. Many companies rely on complex supply chains that span multiple countries. These supply chains often involve sourcing components from China and assembling them elsewhere. The trade war has disrupted these established supply chains. The tariffs and trade barriers have forced companies to rethink their sourcing strategies. Some companies have started to diversify their supply chains away from China. Others have absorbed the increased costs, leading to lower profits. This disruption has created uncertainty and volatility in global markets. The trade war has also contributed to a slowdown in global trade. The tariffs have made goods more expensive, reducing demand. The uncertainty surrounding the trade war has made businesses hesitant to invest and expand. This has further dampened global trade growth. Economic fallout. Impacts on the U.S. and China. The U.S.-China trade war has inflicted economic pain on both countries. While the Trump administration argued that the tariffs would bring China to the negotiating table and benefit the U.S. economy, the reality has been more complicated. Both sides have suffered economic consequences. In the U.S., the tariffs have raised costs for businesses and consumers. American businesses that rely on Chinese imports have faced higher input costs. This has led to lower profit margins or higher prices for consumers. Certain sectors, such as agriculture, have been hit particularly hard. China, too, has felt the effects of the trade war. The tariffs have hurt Chinese exporters. The trade war has also contributed to a slowdown in China's economic growth. Chinese businesses have faced difficulties as a result of the trade war. The trade war has also hurt American farmers, who rely on the Chinese market for their exports. The tariffs have made American agricultural products less competitive in China. This has led to a decline in exports and financial hardship for American farmers. Diplomatic tensions and stalemates. The U.S.-China trade war has exacerbated diplomatic tensions between the two countries. It has made it more difficult to address other areas of disagreement, such as national security and human rights. The trade war has cast a long shadow over the U.S.-China relationship. Despite several rounds of negotiations, the two sides have struggled to reach a comprehensive trade deal. The negotiations have been marked by periods of progress followed by setbacks. Deep disagreements over key issues, such as intellectual property protection and state subsidies, have hindered progress. The lack of a comprehensive trade deal has prolonged the uncertainty surrounding the trade war. This has made it difficult for businesses to plan for the future. It has also contributed to the atmosphere of distrust between the two countries. A new world order. Geopolitical shifts and protectionism. The U.S.-China trade war is not an isolated event. It is a symptom of a larger geopolitical shift. The rise of China as a global power has challenged the existing world order. This has led to increased competition and friction between the two countries. The trade war has also contributed to a rise in protectionist sentiment globally. Other countries have become wary of China's economic practices. They have also become more willing to use tariffs and other trade barriers to protect their own industries. This trend towards protectionism could have significant long-term consequences for the global economy. The U.S.-China trade war is a complex and evolving conflict. It is a product of deep-seated economic and geopolitical tensions. The trade war has had a significant impact on the global economy and the U.S.-China relationship. It remains to be seen how the trade war will ultimately be resolved. However, it is clear that the trade war will have lasting consequences for the global order.